having made the decision to leave my husband of 15 years because I had unexpectedly fallen in love with a woman, it occurred to me that I needed to find a full-time job. So, I'm just really smart that way. So, I did that, and I started working full-time as an in-home family therapist during this very turbulent time in my life. So, emotionally, I'm just hanging on, right? And I'm in a new workplace with a lot of new people. So when I got there, there were two people working there that I had known from previous jobs. One person, it was very interesting. We actually started on the exact same day, and we realized that we had previously worked in that same physical space about 10 years before in a completely different job. So it was really interesting. So we did a little catching up and reminisced about that and talked a little bit. And so in that, she asked me kind of like what was going on with me. And so I broke the news. And I said, well, this is what's going on. It's a lot. I'm just trying to sort it all out. I wasn't really sure what her personal reaction would be. She was an African-American woman who was very involved with her church. But it was fine, and she just looked at me and she said, I don't have a lot of experience with this at all, but I just think you're a really good person, and I wish you the best, and let me know if you need any support. So as far as the rest of the people I worked with, they weren't really high on my priority list. As you might be able to imagine, at that time, I was really just managing my emotional energy. There were lots of people that I needed to come out to, including my children, my parents, close friends. My coworkers were not real high on the list. I'm just trying to manage what I can deal with as I go. So that was working out fine. It was a few months that I had been there, and we had a diversity workshop. So when you work in social services, you often have diversity workshops, and they're often geared towards helping you understand how to work with those you serve, right? Because they're perceived as the other. Family Service Partners, where I worked, was actually the most diverse place I had ever worked. So my colleagues were very diverse. There were African American people, white people, Hispanic people, mixed people, of course, never we forget them. There were people who were out as gay or lesbian. There were people who were Christian, non-believers, Buddhists. So it was really quite a mixed group. Also, just kind of backgrounds were really different. People that went straight through high school, got their bachelor's, got their master's, and now had this master's level kind of counseling class, to people that had more non-traditional paths and were much older and had just gotten their degrees. So a really mixed group of people. So I find myself in a room with about 30 people. Because we did in-home work, we didn't really actually see each other all that much, but we were all together in this big room, and I don't know how many of you have experienced diversity workshops, but any of you that have will probably recognize this one. So we're at the exterior of the room. The room is empty, and we're sitting in chairs kind of facing into the middle. And this was, the exercise was led by two staff people. So they weren't like professional facilitators that were brought in or anything. It was staff people that were leading it. And so what happens is you stand up and you're in a circle, you're facing each other, and they start to identify groups, right? And so if you feel like you identify with that group, you step forward, and then you step back. So they do it with things that they think are kind of safer for the group. They might say things like things that they think are more obvious, like race. They'll talk about, gender. They might say things like rural, suburban, things like that. So of course, as soon as it starts going, I thought, oh shit, right? They're gonna get to sexual orientation, and I'm gonna have to make a decision. When you do the activity, they certainly say that you have a right not to step forward if you don't want to identify with it, but my mind is just racing because I'm thinking, okay, I cannot step forward if I don't feel ready to be out to everyone. On the other hand, if I don't step forward, I feel like I'm saying that I'm straight, so like I said, my mind is just racing, and I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do. But by the time they get to it, I just decide to step forward. I step forward, a couple of other people step forward, we step back, the exercise keeps going. So at that point, I'm just talking myself out of it. I'm like, there's 30 people in this room. Like, let it go. It's not all about you. It's no big deal. I'm just talking myself out of it. Like, nobody's even thinking about you. So I got myself all convinced, and we sit down, and we get to the discussion part. So the appropriate discussion questions are things like, how did you feel if you were the only person that stepped forward with a certain group? So for example, there was only one woman that stepped forward that identified as Buddhist. So she talked about that. What does that mean for you if you work in an environment and you're the only of something? But then one of the women that was leading the group asked an inappropriate question and said, was there anybody that stepped forward for something that surprised you? Now, that's not a really reasonable question, but she asked it. So the other person that I knew that worked there was a guy named Adrian, and I knew him because he used to work at the York Detention Center, and I was raising a young woman who was often in and out of the York County Juvenile Detention Center, and so I had met him there years before. And he leaned forward and he said, well, I've known Debbie for a long time. I met her husband. I met her kids. I didn't know. And I said, well, Adrian, it's new.